Thank you. And I would also note that we offer interpretation on this call in French. I will ask all of the speakers to please use a headphone if possible for optimal sound quality, and to speak a bit slowly when possible as well, to make the task of our great interpreter Rolla a little bit easier. Et je voudrais rappeler aux participants francophones que vous pouvez écouter cette réunion en français en sélectionnant la salle française en bas de votre écran. With this, we're going to get started. So we have a single item on our agenda today. We're going to get an update from Françoise Vanny with the External Relations team at the Global Fund Secretariat so yeah, I'll let her present. I'll let her present her slides, but she'll give us a sense of what are going to be some of the upcoming key dates for replenishment, what the campaign is looking like so far, and a few hints at what the look of a new campaign is going to be. Before we get started with our presentation, I just want to give a little bit of context. As you might know, the Global Fund just had its board meeting in Lilongwe in Malawi over the past week. And there were a number of very interesting conversations. We'll fully debrief the board meeting with the civil society and communities delegations that attended the board. We'll do that next week. But just to give you a sense of some of the substance of the conversations around replenishment that took place at the board, throughout the week, we really kept talking about how high the stakes are for this replenishment. So I've just put on screen a couple of top level points on HIV, TB, and malaria specifically. But on HIV, we are quite close to some of the 2030 targets. And there are new tools, in particular, what's been called an effective vaccine, lenacapavir PrEP, that really open new possibilities in terms of prevention and curbing and further curbing the curve of the disease. On TB, we also have new tools that should be coming down the pipeline that will need rolling out over the coming years. That includes some very strong candidates for new vaccines. And these are quite exciting developments, especially considering the extent of progress we've seen since COVID, even though we did start from a fairly low point, especially right after COVID. So there's still a significant push that needs to happen. And on malaria, we have a bit of a bleak situation where there's been largely a stagnation in terms of impact over the past decade, and we started to see local reversal in a number of countries. And what unites these three themes is the need for more money. We'll need more investment to roll out innovation, to increase impact, and to get closer to the 2030 targets. And to be clear, the 2030 targets they're not magical. Nothing dramatic is going to happen on the 1st of January 2030, but it's going to be the end of 14 years of ambition. And it really be a moment to reflect back on what have we achieved globally, and especially in health. And so we really think that we need to keep in mind that this replenishment is the last replenishment that is likely to make an impact towards the 2030 targets. And finally, something I came back again during the board and has been, at the center of conversations for a long time, is the challenges of this replenishment. And I'm sure Françoise will extensively come back to those. But one thing we want to highlight as GFAN is that it's a bit of a strange space, because we hear a lot about fiscal pressure in donor countries, but there isn't really an economic crisis. It's really a matter of making choices that might not be easy, but it's important to remember that the donor countries aren't suddenly a lot poorer. They are just putting their resources somewhere else. And at the same time, we see a rise of anti-rights rhetoric, and some of those rhetoric take place in very influential countries. With overall there are very tumultuous politics and geopolitics. So there are reasons to be concerned about the outcome of a replenishment, but there are also very strong reasons not to give up before we even start the fight. So with this, I am going to stop my presentation and move on to Françoise. Françoise, if you want to take the floor, I'll just project the slide. Give me a second.
Of course. Thank you. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Can you just confirm that you are hearing me okay?
Yes, we can hear you great.
Fantastic. Super. So thank you very much for joining this call. And thank you, Quentin, for setting the scene beautifully, including with this short download from the board meeting, which was actually very useful for us in setting the scene ahead of what promises to be a rather challenging replenishment, but also very exciting with opportunities and a lot of determination from our board members to fight for what counts. So I'm going to update you on where we are in terms of our resource mobilization efforts and our preparations for the 8th replenishment. I'll speak for about 15-20 minutes or so that we have time to engage with each of you and take your questions, but also your advice in this endeavor. So, Quentin, would you mind going to the next slide? And I think this one is supposed to move. Can you make it move or not? Yes, fantastic. So this is just a short slide, a moving slide, to tell you how busy that has been. We have always said that we would have to start these replenishment efforts early and that it was going to be intense. And this is exactly what it is turning to be, quite intense. And we've been doing quite a lot already, but also the world has been extremely volatile with a lot of disruptions, a lot of volatility, a lot of political changes, a lot of conflicts and so on, a lot of climate-related disasters. And of course, this is the context we work in and we work with. So that has required from all of us a lot of agility and capacity to adapt to ever-changing circumstances. So that's a little bit the background on which we are preparing our 8th replenishment. And the mot d'ordre, if you allow me a French word, is really agility, adaptability, and determination. Because as you said, Quentin, these are not reasons to give up the fight, but rather to keep very determined as we tackle all of those challenges. So against this backdrop, and we can go to probably the next slide, Quentin, please. We have been obviously continuing to focus our efforts on pledge conversion and ongoing resource mobilization efforts for the 7th replenishment cycle, and then at the same time as we work on the preparation for the 8th replenishment. So let's go first to a quick update on where we are for the 7th replenishment and actually the 6th replenishment as well. So that's an important slide to share with you that we are well on track when it comes to pledge conversion. And that's really, really important, obviously, because we don't take that for granted. We usually count on very diligent donors, and they usually pay what they promise, which is great. But that doesn't mean that doesn't require a lot of efforts from all of us and all of you to help make that happen. So when it comes to the 6th replenishment, we have converted roughly 100% of the pledges, so that's great. That includes C19RM. So an unprecedented amount in total. And then for the 7th replenishment, we are very well on track as well. As you can see, a number of agreements signed with public donors and private donors, covering already a large amount of pledges, $8.5 billion US worth of agreements signed with public donors and $1.1 billion worth agreements signed with the private donor. So that's great. We have already received a little bit more than half in cash. So we are well positioned there, and very, very grateful to donors and all the advocates who have helped us secure that so far. And then there is another piece of good news on this slide, which is that we have managed to secure additional pledges in the meantime. So following the 7th replenishment conference and the board meeting a couple of years ago, we have secured actually $109 million of pledges since then from a number of donors who have been kind enough to consider the Global Fund to receive any top-up from their leftovers at the end of the year, or any additional money that they had, but also, as you can see, very significant pledges from the private sector. So that is really encouraging. Our efforts in that space are paying off, and we hope to be able to build on that for the aid replenishment. So that's where we are at the moment. So as you can see, there is no boring moments, and we've been very actively securing additional funding. So we can go to, Quentin, if you don't mind, we can go now to the aid replenishment preparation. As I said, we started very early. You can see here the sort of initial planning slide that we have been working with as a sort of North Star over the past few months, if that makes sense. So starting from the bottom, obviously we are working in a very volatile environment when it comes to elections. So you can see the number of flags there. Some of them are moving from one side to the other. Some have delivered different outcomes than the, changed very significant changes in politics and governments in key donor countries. And then we are also working in an environment that is quite crowded when it comes to replenishment and resource mobilization efforts with our colleagues at WHO, Gavi, and others actively fundraising sort of at the same time. So we've been very busy in the preparation phase to kind of position the Global Fund, making sure that we were engaging in the right moments with the right audiences to keep our relevance top of mind of decision makers. And we are now, so this is all the gray area on the left-hand side of the slide. We are very much now in the acceleration phase. We just had the board meeting, Quentin mentioned, and we are accelerating our preparations with one very important milestone ahead of us, which is the launch of the campaign, but also the launch of the investment case. Somewhere in February, somewhere in Q1 is usually the time when we launch the investment case and the campaign, and then run with the campaign until roughly September, sometimes early October, for the final pledging moment. So that's the overall planning. Obviously, more events will come up on this slide as we go, but that gives you a first idea of what are the key milestones we are thinking of. And early 2025, I would perhaps single out the World Economic Forum in Davos at the end of January, which is likely to be an important moment to mobilize the private sector, and then the African Union Summit in February, where we hope to be able to work with African heads of state and other champions to accelerate the commitment to the Global Fund and the fight against the 3 diseases. Okay, so let's go to the next slide, which is just a reminder to all of us that we have published in September results reports for all of our impact achieved in 2023, as well as the combined with cumulative impact achieved over the past 22 years with 65 million lives saved. And that's really important because that offers really a very strong platform, a very strong foundation for all of our resource mobilization efforts moving forward. It's a very important exercise when it comes to transparency, accountability, reporting back. And surely what we've heard at the board last week was that while donors may have different areas of keen interest, they are all, absolutely all, very keen to hear the story of impact and efficiency, and how every dollar that they invest in the Global Fund helps deliver lives saved and infections averted in a very tangible way. So we will continue to report on impact in a very careful way. And in the full report that is on the website, of course, you'll have all sorts of data points and stories to back up our advocacy efforts. So we can go to the next slide, and I'll give you a brief readout of where we are when it comes to the different aid replenishment work streams. So all of them are well in progress, well on track, despite the external uncertainties. So first piece is the investment case. As you know very well, this is the backbone of our replenishment efforts. This is the piece that tells us how much is needed and which scale of impact can be achieved. Can we get back on track to achieve the SDG targets and so on? We are currently working, completing the modeling and analytical work, working on the first draft of the report, and we are on track to launch in Q1, as I mentioned before. On the campaign, similarly, we are well on track. We have a concept, we have a narrative, we have a very exciting creative platform that we have sort of tested a little bit with our board last week, providing some little taste of how it would look like, with a lot of determination, a lot of Global Fund spirit in it. And we are looking at what are the key moments to launch and elevate and amplify the campaign moving forward. And that's something we'll be working very closely with GFAN partners. We are also accelerating or intensifying, should I say, our efforts to secure hosts for the replenishment. So I emphasize the S hosts because obviously we need multiple hosts. At the very least, we need an implementing country host where we hope to be able to launch. And then a key donor, hopefully a G7 major donor also hosting, and hopefully hosting the final pledging moment. But we're looking at a combination of partners, and that's ongoing with very active outreach at the moment. The resource mobilization strategies are all very well developed. Actually, they've been developed for quite some time. The teams have been working with all the advocates and partners to get that updated and sharp and focused and really impactful strategies. The reality of it is that we need to update them all the time, given the volatility I referred to at the beginning. We are constantly adapting those strategies, but we are sort of at the ready. The other thing that we've been doing quite a lot is ensuring strong engagement this year, but also potentially next year with the G7 and the G20 processes. And that's really important to ensure that the Global Fund's mission is not forgotten, is out there, and can continue to benefit from the backup of G7 and G20 countries. Next year, G7 will be, the presidency will be with Canada, the G20 will be with South Africa. We are actively working with both of them in preparation for those processes. And obviously engaging with the C7 and the C20 as well from the civil society front. On the private sector side, similarly, we have strong strategies in place, as you saw in the pledge conversion update at the beginning. In a way, with the private sector, the replenishment cycle doesn't matter that much. It provides an incentive, it provides a good platform for them to pledge, but it doesn't necessarily mean that this is their cycle. So we have sort of used all the time in between replenishments to bring them on board and secure additional pledges. So we are in very active conversations with many of them and trying to have a sort of a campaign stream that would specifically talk to private sector audiences. It needs to be bespoke. It cannot be exactly the same tools, the same narrative, the same content, to make sure that we engage with them efficiently. And as I mentioned, the World Economic Forum in Davos in January is going to be an important moment to call the private sector to continue to fight with us. We continue to work very closely with our advocacy ecosystem, and obviously all of you are in this virtual room today. And we know it's a challenging environment when it comes to civil society space, civil society funding. So we continue to work along the lines of our advocacy roadmap, and making sure that we adjust, we strategize with you all to continue advocating for the Global Fund. And we're also working very closely with regional bodies and champions and global health partners to make sure that our fight against the 3 diseases and for health system strengthening is well represented in key moments and processes. And finally, yes, the engagement with global platforms, I guess I've mentioned, and you've seen through the calendar, we continue to engage, whether it's WHA, whether it's WHS, UNGA, all those relevant processes, African Union summits, and so on and so forth. This is something that we will continue to do. And I mentioned that for the host, we had an S to the host, because actually what we want to do is to make sure that in this very volatile environment, we take advantage of every opportunity along the way. So in a way, or every donor can pledge whenever they want. So we want to have this multipolar replenishment model where we can really leverage every opportunity and also get the pledges as early as possible, which will help mitigate the funding risks moving forward. So it's a very, let's say, ad hoc approach to adapt to the current environment. Okay, so I think we can go to the next slide, perhaps just giving a little bit of background, because this is a space that you know very well. And you might be interested in hearing a little bit more on how we are looking at that. So obviously, the challenge that we face in the public donor space is that overall ODA is declining, or if it's not declining, technically, it is actually being repurposed, used for domestic costs for refugees, for example, or things that do not really add up. Obviously, we had some sort of an increase for the COVID-19 response, but that is not going to be sustained over time. So in fact, it's ODA is declining, which means that we face more challenges with competing demands coming to the donors, whether it is for development overall or even specifically within the health assistance budgets, with many replenishments coming at the same time. So as you can see, we do have some upward opportunities there with some very important donors of the Global Fund, like Korea, who you may recall increased their pledge to the Global Fund by fourfold last time, from $25 to $100 million. So that was a great increase, and we hope to continue building on that. Ireland continues to be a very fidel donor, unwavering commitment, and some opportunities to increase, similarly with Luxembourg. But on the other side, drastic cuts are being made in France, in Germany, in Sweden, and in the UK. We had drastic cuts already last time, and we are not sure how much that will continue to be the case given the current domestic situation. So it's kind of challenging, and as you said, Quentin, we need to mitigate the risk, but at the same time look at the opportunities and make sure that we maximize them. Next slide, please. Yeah, I can probably go a little bit faster on this one, but indeed, we've seen a lot of political transitions in many, well, actually most of our donor countries. Some were planned, we knew of some elections coming, others were not planned, but just happened. And we have to work in that context. So everything that has to do with intelligence gathering and making sure that we understand who are the new players, what are their sort of political drivers, etc., etc. How is the budget process happening in each of these countries following elections is quite important. We are putting a lot of effort in sustaining cross-party support. As you know, in most of the countries we work in, we've been nurturing bipartisan support in the parliaments, and that's extremely important in those times. We also realize that we need to tailor our messaging to different countries, so we cannot go with, I mean, we'll have, our resource report, our core investment case, a sort of chapeau narrative is obviously the same. But we increasingly have to tailor our messaging to different audiences, new interlocutors that may not be familiar with the Global Fund, may have other interests in entering in a conversation with the Global Fund and so on. So we need to be very careful in the communications that we deploy, very well curated, very timely, and close coordination with advocacy partners. And obviously, friends, GFAN, the wider advocacy community, where we might have different approaches, but it's really important that we coordinate in this changing environment. And then finally, we are also trying to be as strategic as we possibly can in our resource mobilization efforts. in collaborating and coordinating with other global health initiatives, global health partnerships, whether it's WHO, Gavi, and others, to try and mitigate the risk of competition and support each other as much as possible as well. So finally, I think we have a slide on the private sector opportunities. I think the next one, yes. So this is something we are looking at very strongly, and I mean, it's not new, of course, but it was very clear at the board meeting last week as well that there is perhaps an increased appetite from the board to leverage more the opportunities with the private sector. It's not true to say that there is less money in the world. There is actually more money in the world, but it's not exactly accessible or not necessarily in the right places. And a lot of wealth has been actually concentrated in private hands. So there is opportunity there. But we have obviously a few, let's say, tools to engage with them. More particularly the catalytic investment opportunities. So at the board meeting last week, the board confirmed those catalytic investment opportunities, and those are very useful because they create a platform for the private sector investment when they want to focus on specific things. They want to focus on next-gen market shaping. They want to focus on sustainability. They want to support blended finance. They want to support gender. So those are really, really important to build up the commitment from the private sector. Yeah, I should have mentioned as well, labs, community health workers, all of those themes that you see there, climate and health. So we have this good offer there. And then perhaps the last thing I will mention on this slide is that what we see in many of the public donor countries, there is an increasing interest in private sector engagement. So we are asked consistently, how are we working with the private sector? And they want to hear more about innovation, about next-gen market shaping, and so on. So how we work also in countries with private sector partners. So in a way, it has multiple benefits with the private sector partners and their contributions per se, but also the wider benefit in sustaining or increasing engagement with public donors. So I think I'll stop there on this one, and I'm mindful of the time, so perhaps I'll go a little bit faster. So this is the timeline for the investment case development. I'll be brief. We are I mentioned before, we were finalizing the technical work. So that's the first arrow at the top, very much in the final phase of looking at the numbers, how that all fits together, working on the narrative, and obviously looking at also what the ask is going to be. Not finalized yet, but we are on track for the launch roughly in February next year. Next slide. Yes, so I think perhaps to highlight here, this obviously we have a few years of practice when it comes to developing investment cases. So we build on those on that practice and lessons learned, but we have new things this time because so many new needs have appeared in terms of making the case for the Global Fund. So we have been looking more in depth, and the investment case will show more. When it comes to return on investment, when it comes to the impact of health system strengthening investments, when it comes to primary healthcare capacity that is being freed up as a result of the Global Fund investments, the impact of our investments on life expectancy. So different analyses have been developed to provide a richer, more solid narrative for our advocacy and resource mobilization efforts. So I'll probably pass on some of the data here, but if you have questions, hopefully we can answer. I think my colleague Johannes is on the call as well, in case you have specific questions there. Okay, so we can continue. A few words on the campaign. So I think this slide probably wraps up a few things that I've mentioned already. We are adapting our campaign strategy to the high level of uncertainty surrounding us. And that means that we need to be constantly reminding our audiences of the relevance of the Global Fund. We need to be ready for every moment. We cannot wait for the perfect moment. There won't be a perfect moment, so we need to roll and take advantage of every opportunity. So we may have, it might not have been the case last time, but if you think back for the 6th replenishment, we actually had a number of early pledges throughout the entire campaign. And that's a great model that we want to in a way, use again this time, given the context we face. And then we talked about the need to tailor to audiences, new decision makers coming on board, different political trends and so on. So we really need to speak to them in a very compelling manner. And perhaps if you go to the next slide, I can explain very briefly the pathos, logos, and ethos language. So the pathos it has to do with emotions. So we are building a campaign that will speak to the emotions of our audiences and speaks to the relentless humanity of the Global Fund in the face of crisis, right? Crisis is what is top of mind of global leaders and decision makers. So we need to meet them where they are and really move them to get engaged with us. Then the logos is more the rational piece, the brain, how to make sure we have compelling data, compelling stories, very grounded. The investment case is part of that. And we need to demonstrate our determination, but also our adaptability to changing circumstances and how the Global Fund can quickly pivot to address COVID-19, to address climate change disasters, to address conflicts and so on and so forth, and continue to fight the deadly infectious diseases. And then ethos speaks more to who is speaking, who is the messenger, and what is the authority that comes with that. And obviously, we are very lucky. We have this wide partnership and all of our advocates who can speak very, very credibly and compellingly about our role and who call us our Global Fund. So this spirit is at the core of the campaign development process. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of the thinking behind that. And the idea, of course, is to influence, particularly the rich donors, as you can see in the middle, but all the other circles are very important as well to achieve that result. Okay, so perhaps I think we are almost done. Next slide, please, Quentin. There's a video.
Yes, I'm going to try to play the video. I'm sorry, bear with me.
Oh, I had forgotten. Okay, so here you go, video, a teaser.
Exactly.
Before one ends, another begins. But when you are fighting the world's deadliest infectious diseases, you don't just stop. When there is a flood, famine, or conflict, you keep going. Climate change threatens progress, you keep going. You adapt, you double down. Those whose lives depend on it, you give it everything. Because when we do, we can achieve anything. Give it everything. Stop at nothing.
All right.
Thank you. Yeah, we missed probably the couple of initial words, but it doesn't matter. Hopefully that gives you, this teaser gives you a bit of the spirit of the campaign, a little bit the core narrative that we are at the side of the vulnerable countries, most vulnerable communities. Whatever happens, we continue to fight and we stop at nothing. Et nous ne lâchons rien for the Francophones who are on this call. Y nada nos detiene for the Spanish speakers on this call. So that's the spirit of determination that we want to convey through the campaign. So looking forward, and perhaps we can go to the next potentially final slide. In terms of the priorities moving forward for us, we'll continue to focus on donor engagement and pledge conversion. As I mentioned, super important that we do get all the money promised in. We will continue to intensify. So, okay, you can probably go to the next one. Yeah, thank you. The positioning, the visibility, the thought leadership, really bringing all the rational arguments for why the investment in the Global Fund makes sense, strengthening the partnership engagement. A lot of donors are asking us to demonstrate further how we collaborate and optimize our efforts with other global health partners. So that's something that we are increasingly doing and preparing for the launch of the investment case in the campaign in Q1, as I said, working closely with all of our advocacy partners, champions, and all of you on this call. So look, we are here with my team members and very keen to hear from you, your advice, and that's the next and final slide. I mean, any questions you would have, of course, but also your inputs, your advice on the narrative. Is there anything that we should consider, may have missed? Resource mobilization, similarly, any thoughts? How we could better support the engagement of the advocacy ecosystem in the campaign. We are very eager to hear your thoughts about that, as well as on tools that might be most useful for you. We have already displayed a couple of those tools at the board meeting last week, a T-shirt and postcards, etc. But obviously there is more to come. So I stop there, Quentin. Sorry, I've been a bit longer than I expected. Back to you.
Thank you so much, Françoise, and that was a great presentation. So I will let participants raise their hands if they want to ask questions or put them in the chat. While you'll do that, I will just bring your attention, Françoise, to a first question that came during your presentation from Nupur around clarifying what are the changes from the private sector strategy for the 8th replenishment and the 7th replenishment. And in particular, so what are the differences between the two approaches? And in particular, whether there are key targets for advocacy that you think civil society support would be useful for? We can't hear you, Françoise. You're still muted, I think.
Sorry, sorry for that. Yeah, and thanks for the question. So I would say it's not an entirely new private sector engagement strategy, because we are building on the platforms that we have created in the past and that have proven very helpful. So for example, as I was mentioning, labs integration is a platform that exists. It builds on the current catalytic investments in that space, and we continue to grow the existing partners and try to leverage them and their networks to bring more partners into the fold. So it's more, I would say it's probably more ambitious, because we will go for a big target from the private sector. Better targeted, because we now know those places that we have built over the past few years. And we have kind of a lot of expectations with our donors and prospects there. So I wouldn't say it's entirely new, but it's certainly sharper and bolder. And what is new perhaps in that space is the fact that we now have a catalytic initiative that has been approved by the board for climate and health. So that certainly is new. And we hope to be announcing the first donors to launch this catalytic investment in the climate and health space early next year in Davos. So that's a new area. But for the rest, it really builds on the key themes that we've been working on so far, but with greater ambition. And we welcome advocacy support on those themes and towards those partners in a tailored manner. There is no blanket response to that question, actually. It would have to be tailored.
So I see one question from a participant I haven't met before, Katie, I think. I hope I pronounced that right. Go ahead, Katie.
Yes. Hi, everybody. it's Katie. Sorry, I was able to raise the hand because I'm not actually hosting this call, which is wonderful. But I did just want to connect, Francois, as we had the opportunity to see each other last week at the board meeting. And one of the things that we did sort of quickly talk about is, and haven't landed on a plan or anything, but is the need to have more consistent and regular conversations with GFAN members to kind of make sure that we're all in the loop as these ever-evolving kind of pivots. And I'm now thinking about, you know, it shows my age and my culture, but Friends, the TV show, memes about, you know, moving things through tough corridors. If anybody else gets that joke about pivot from Friends. But, you know, because I think that's going to be really important for all of us to know sort of what's happening in terms of, you know, when you do have the preparatory meeting hosts and other sort of hosts for, you know, pledging or other moments and those kinds of things for colleagues to know, you know, where we're pushing which countries towards those moments, but also the opportunities. You know, Mark from Friends had popped something into the chat about, you know, a private sector event that took place during UNGA, which, you know, really showed some of the important private sector kind of interest that could be there that others might be sort of interested in doing. So I just wanted to say, like, to everybody that, you know, we had talked about this a little bit, you know, just the recognition that we will need to have more regular sort of and even more informal convenings on GFAN calls with colleagues from the Secretariat to be updated and to update and share information with each other around, you know, what the next sort of moment is, because they're going to come fast and furious by the sounds of things. So I just wanted to mention that for colleagues as something that we're kind of aware of, and we'll switch a little bit. So fewer like 40-minute presentations every month or two, and more just regular presence from our colleagues at the Secretariat to do quick sort of updates through next year. So, and Francoise, I look forward to seeing you in Ottawa next week when you're here working on the Canadian government or with the Canadian government, so we can discuss more. That's it for me.
Thanks, Katie. Anyone else with a question? There's a few of us on the call. You can raise your hand. You can put them in the chat.
And as people consider their questions or comments, yes, Katie, absolutely. That would be extremely useful if we were able to touch base with you more regularly, given the fast and furious changing environments facing us. So yes, absolutely.
Yeah, thanks, Françoise. So we have a bit of a quieter room today. People are being a bit shy, so we might finish a bit early, but I did want to bring up one point because I think it's a conversation that was quite central during the board, and I think something that a lot of us are worrying about. In terms of how the Secretariat is looking at its messaging, we know that in a number of key countries, we've seen political changes towards, you know, more fiscally conservative governments coming to power, and also governments that have taken a very specific side on, let's say, cultural issues. Can you give us some cues at the kind of messaging that the Secretariat is exploring on how to, what to do and what not to do with regard to engaging with some of these more problematic actors? Just like for context, I mean, obviously the upcoming US administration, but we know that we might have difficult administration coming in Canada. We have a very right-wing government in the Netherlands. We have Italy. There's a number of them.
Yes, thank you, Quentin. It's indeed top of mind for all of us who are in this advocacy space. So, I mean, let me start by saying that the core of the Global Fund mission, mandate, values, principles doesn't change, right? We are not saying, oh, because somebody is unhappy, somebody has changed their, you know, political majority in a particular donor country has changed. The mandate is the mandate, and the guiding principles we have remain. That being said, we need to be very smart at how we position ourselves and communicate in specific contexts. Otherwise, we risk, you know, losing a lot for not having thought that through. So it's really about making sure that we sort of amplify the themes that are more likely to attract the political audience we are talking to. So indeed, in right-wing, more conservative leaning governments we are dealing with, there is a lot of interest on private sector engagement, innovation, national security. So therefore, global health security might resonate more. Some of the diseases might resonate more than others. Some of the stories might resonate more than others. So we need to be very careful in terms of what we amplify and with which sort of data points and stories. But also there is a consideration in terms of who are the speakers, who are the advocates, who is the messenger. So just to give a couple of examples, in those countries, having private sector champions is actually helpful. If I think of the US, for example, we can speak of the Global Fund as an innovative space for private sector engagement, for US innovations, etc. That can be important from a messenger standpoint. Faith-based organization leaders can also be influential in such contexts. We need to think carefully about that too. So these are the things we are adapting in each context. Well, as I said, not changing the principles, but how we talk about that. And perhaps the third thing I would say, which may sound a bit obvious, but it's not, is that in many of those contexts, we find ourselves engaging with people who may not be just familiar with the Global Fund. They may have assumptions and they don't know how the model works, what we do, what we don't do, and so on. And therefore, it's always better to start sort of with the basics and try to avoid acronyms and making it very complicated and make sure that we meet them where they are. Because if we start with things that they don't understand, then it's going to become very difficult to engage. So these are the few thoughts I would offer at this point in time.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Françoise. Kasia, do you want to jump in?
Yes. Hi, everyone. I just wanted to thank you, first of all, for this presentation. And then I just wanted to use this opportunity to flag that I've sent an email to GFAN to request you to join our MFF hub, because as you might know, as in France and the Netherlands and in Germany, like the situation in Brussels is pretty bad. I mean, we had 2 billion cuts as part of the MFF midterm review, but you know about this, and the situation doesn't look good for the next budget. And we know the next pledge will take place against the next budget. And so it's really important for us to secure a strong budget in Brussels for the next 7 years, not only for this replenishment, but also for the replenishments to come. And I think what I also wanted to know is, Françoise, if we had any visibility on leadership visits to our countries or markets, because I think that like building also advocacy activities around that would be extremely useful. So if there's anything you can share, please let us know. On the private sector, we have a new commissioner for international partnerships who is really is an investment banker. He loves the private sector. And so this is something we were trying to figure out, what's the kind of European private sector hook here that we could look into. So if you have any information or anything, because it's not that we don't want to engage the private sector, but I think we're just lacking the information to identify what are the good hooks here that we could use, but very keen to do that. So please let me know. And I also wanted to encourage colleagues, who, especially from European countries, I know it's very hard, with your replenishment plans, but always to bring in a European angle into your efforts, right? Because it's Europe. So that's always appreciated. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, Kasia. And before I give you the floor, Françoise, I just want to highlight one additional question from Tarita in the chat around what is the strategy for engaging new donors, for example, the Gulf states, though noting that not all of the Gulf states are new donors, there's a number of them that have been historical donors, though at not huge levels.
Great, thank you. So actually, one of the things that I didn't mention when I was talking about the messengers, I will mention now because it applies to the EC. Kasia, thank you for your questions and contribution, which is the voice of the heads of states of implementing countries. We live in an era of geopolitics. Pretty much everything is determined by geopolitics. The EC in particular and the EU members are very keen on restoring the relationship with Africa in particular. So these are messengers who can be really, really helpful for us. So we are working with them very, very closely. So, on the EC particularly, yes, we are fully aware of the challenges with the MFF and the need to secure a strong MFF for the next 7 years. This is something that we have incorporated in our talking points with every single EU member states, so that we ask them to support the Global Fund in that negotiation. That also means that given the timing, we will have to go for a political pledge. This because of the timing, so we need to go up to Ursula von der Leyen and secure a political pledge and leadership and commitment at that level, given the timing we are dealing with. Another aspect, perhaps, on the engagement with the EC and European member states is the relevance of our response in Ukraine and how we are supporting partners there. It's very sad to say that after 3 years, we are where we are, but this is certainly a story of impact that is really, really compelling with those donors, including, by the way, with some new donors that we hope to secure, not the Gulf in that context, but Eastern Europe donors. For example, Poland is one of those new donors that we would like to secure, and where we have good hooks to engage with them. On private sector, the teams are very busy looking at all sorts of data points that might be helpful with specific angles. So we are looking at, the procurement and specific partners and so on, so that for each member state, we can have some data point to back it up. Sometimes it's it can be tricky with some states because our procurements are not coming mostly from Europe, as you know. So we are looking at all of those hooks, and we'll be sharing what we have there. But yeah, it's about procurement, innovation, partnerships that we have that we can sort of elevate with political decision makers. And then finalizing on the Gulf. So actually, the Gulf. These are not new donors. They have actually been with us since the beginning for many of them, like Saudi, for example, has been with us since the beginning. But it's true that the amounts are not at the level that we would hope. So we continue to engage with them. We have intensified our participation into the big events that the Gulf countries are organizing, whether it's the Doha Forum or the Humanitarian Forum. They all have different, very high level, high visibility events in which we engage, and we're also trying to expand our networks there. And as you know, public and private are sort of connected. So we are very active on that front ahead of the next replenishment. But we are also looking at other potential new donors beyond that. So I think colleagues are probably trying to send me messages through the other channel, but anyway. Yes, okay, so colleagues are telling me that the top 5 things that we are including in the private sector focused investment opportunity that we are preparing for Davos, and for, as I said, our ambitious ask to the private sector are the following ones: climate change and health, linked to the new catalytic fund that I mentioned before, next gen, and everything that has to do with scaling up new game-changing health products, and we have a number of them for the 3 diseases. Women's health and gender equity is an area of lot of interest also from our private sector partners. Global health security, also I mentioned, surveillance labs and so on and so forth. And then digital health and artificial intelligence is also an area where we have a lot to offer to attract the private sector. So I hope that was useful. I'll stop there.
Thanks a lot, Françoise. I don't see any other question, and so unless anyone wants to jump in, we'll move towards closing the call. So I'm going to just stop sharing presentation. Thank you. I don't see any hands raised, once, twice. All right. So thank you so much for joining us this week, Françoise. Good luck for your trip to Canada. We hope everything works out. And want to remind everyone on the call that we'll have an exceptional call next week on the 4th of December, which will be a debrief of a board meeting of last week, and that will be our last call of the year. So if you want to bring, I don't know, Christmas hats or something, you're more than welcome. You can do that, but it's not mandatory. Just do come. So we'll have 3 delegations on the call, and we'll do a debrief of last week. So I want to thank everyone for joining us this week, and we should give you back 2 minutes and wish you all a very good end of the week. Bye, and thanks again, Françoise.
Thank you, Quentin.
Bye, thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.